I can't thank Ethan and Sean enough for doing this. And I know that they're always waiting for another call to go out there and putting themselves in harm's way. So I really appreciate you guys doing this. And we thank our sponsors, which is Pro Photo Daily, Photo Shelter, Epson, and American Photography. Just a note: next week we have Stephen Shames, who's uh, a really terrific photographer. Did a lot of black and white photography during the 60s with Angela Davis and the Black Panthers, a lot of great street protest work. So that's for next week. So tonight we have Sean Scheidt, and I got that right, right? There you go. And Ethan Swope. And Ethan is going to start us off by sharing the screen, and off we go. Again, both of you, thank you so much. And everyone, for coming in. I appreciate that very much.
Terrific.
All right, you're on.
Super. Howdy, everybody. Um, and I just had, here we go. Thank you, everyone. I'm Ethan, and I am based in LA here. I've been freelancing for 6, 7 years now. I'm currently graduating UCLA in June with a degree in cinematography. So still, a young one. And I got my start with the Associated Press, where I do a lot of my freelance for when I was 17. I got my first assignment covering a wildfire for Noah Berger, who was a terrific photojournalist and consider a mentor. Oh, I see the bug that's happening. Let me reshare. Anyway, and I was called. I was like, hey, can you cover this fire? And I told them I was 17. I didn't have my driver's license at the time yet. And so anyone would do and had my dad drive me. But that takes me to my first point, which is, safety is so important for covering fires. Over the years, I've seen many, looky-loos, people wanting to cover fires, and they just aren't, wearing the correct equipment. Of course, California laws, we're allowed to be anywhere as long as we are not hindering. And so that means, for me, wearing the same protective equipment that the firefighters are. This fire season has been unlike anything that I'd seen before. Come January, I was expecting to have rains. And in fact, I didn't have my typical fire car with all the radios and antennas. I'd come back from winter break expecting, a calm. But I get a call that we were anticipating some high winds, red flag conditions, extremely dry weather. And so I was preparing alongside my other colleagues and editors about a plan about how to cover these fires. One thing that we're trying to do is get information out as quickly and accurately as possible. And so we've been, investing in new technologies like Starlink to be able to transmit from the field.
Yeah, Ethan, can you just share with us a little bit of you being a firefighter photographer,
Mhm.
and how that related to your parents allowing you to do this at such a young age?
Sure. Yeah. So I got interested in photojournalism when I was in high school. I was my editor of my high school newspaper for doing photos, picking up little sports assignments for our local newspaper, and was always interested in, how the world worked. And I found, a camera was able to let me become part of, embed myself into different communities. And that meant covering sports games, other stories, protests. Had my camera wherever I went. I think I was like 13. I would just take my camera down San Francisco, and my parents were very free to let me do what I wanted, and I would just explore. But my first big project that I did was I was 16 and I went down to the border to Tijuana with my best friend and his father, who was a war correspondent, and I was covering the migrant caravans.
Mhm.
But yeah, so my parents have always been supportive. They're very concerned about my safety, of course, and that goes back to when I covered. I've been to Ukraine a few times, and so it's a lot of conversations with them about how to do things safely, and yeah.
Great. Okay. All
So
right.
I get the call for the Palisades fire. I got a notification. I was in class. It was the first day, no, second day of school, and we saw the smoke column, and it was building rapidly. And so this is sort of my a general timeline of the photos. I get there and I could already tell that this was going to be a significant incident. A lot of homes in the area, and they were trying to get everybody out as quickly as possible. A lot of, my concerns come from the campfire back in 2018 when they opened up both lanes of the road and then the fire had crossed and burning all the vehicles. I managed to get up there and people were, running from their cars. Residents were dousing their homes as flames, were approaching. This person was trying to put water on his neighbor's property. Uh, should I just keep restarting when it exits out? I'm seeing the bug. Frank.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we hear you.
Cool. Um, and so yeah, I've covered dozens of fires, and sadly this was, the most devastating. We're trying to document on the, people's worst day of their lives. And so, trying to be respectful. We'll try and get the information out. Here we're covering tanker drops. They were dousing the flames. This was a hill above the Palisades fire. I actually couldn't get down off the hill because the traffic was so congested. So I just had to stay up there, trying to make frames where I could.
And are you getting any direction from the editors, what they're looking for, or they just say go and shoot it?
They leave it to me. We had a few other photographers there with me for the AP. We were as we could see what was happening. They brought on more and more photographers. I was actually in an area with really terrible cell service, and so the other photographer Etienne was able to get the first images out. And so, but they sort of trust me to make the images that we need. Some people leaving, some people staying. Everyone is quite emotional.
Um,
Here, a firefighter is jumping over a fence. The electronic gate had been locked, and so they used pliers to open it up. This is midday at this point. Many homes had burnt, but we didn't really know the scale of what was going to happen until evening when the winds picked up again and lofted embers down all the way down to the ocean. Here, I saw a hill on top with a mansion, and I went up to examine it because there are a lot of nice homes in the Palisades. And I thought it was very striking seeing the staircase here, framed within the window.
mhm.
Yeah. Here, this is when I knew really how bad the fire was going to be when it was so windy that the embers were just lofting from house to house and just burning, home after home after home. I don't think any number of firefighters would have been able to stop this inferno. Sadly, I know there was issues with water and lack of it. But when you have a fire like this, there's really no stopping it.
And where is this?
This was down Palisades in Temescal Canyon. I got there and it was just home after home after home. It was burning.
And can you feel the heat from these fires?
When I get close, I have, the face shield, and so I will have to wrap it around my face a little bit because it does get warm when you're closer. But like on the street, it's not too bad, you know.
And so you're there shooting. I mean, what's your sense of my environment, to be looking behind you to your sides so you don't get caught in the middle?
Sure. I like usually buddying up with another photographer. So we have two cars. If one breaks down, we're able to get out. I actually got a flat tire the second day, and so had to fix that. But situational awareness is super important. I've done CAL FIRE training for the media, and I'm always looking at escape routes, places to pull over. You always leave your car running in case there's not enough oxygen in the air to turn it back
Uh,
on, and also in case a firefighter has to move it, God forbid.
yeah,
Like this
that was what I was going to ask you. Like, what are the little nuances that we wouldn't know, like leaving the car on? What are
leaving
the things? do you learn to do?
Sure. Yeah, leaving the car running, I carry radios to be able to listen to the firefighters so that you can hear what they're talking about and where to go. Um,
And that's legal to do that?
yeah, yeah, you can even use your phone. There's apps like Broadcastify. There's Twitter, of course. And now one of the new apps, which is Watch Duty, is also very is excellent. And then they link to official updates as well as what they're hearing on the scanner, and then links to live feeds from cameras that are like on top of mountain tops all over the state. Yeah. This is I think one of the more interesting photos from the Palisades. It happened just right after Christmas time, and so this is a Christmas tree just burning inside someone's home. And
Mm,
the homeowner actually reached out to they wanted to confirm that this was their house, and I had to give them the unfortunate news that it was.
mm. We now have your grid again, Ethan.
You have my grid again?
Yeah.
Okay, you don't. Okay, whoops. I will go back.
So that's got to be pretty grim news to give to somebody. And how was that conveyed to them? Did they send you a text, a
It
call,
was
or
an email. Yeah, it was an email.
email?
Yeah, they asked for that address, and they thought it was theirs.
Now, I mean, in a case like that, the family, if the family said, we'd love to have that photograph, or we'd like to, being that you're working for AP, can you give them a file?
I gave it to them. Yeah. I find like yes, there are rules that we have to follow for the Associated Press. They own my copyright, but when it comes to like families, I think it's important. They've lost everything. So to be able to give them, at least just a photo is, I find is, important and justifiable.
And does that happen, Ethan?
What?
Somebody requesting, a print, or a file, of that, like the Christmas tree there is pretty poignant.
Yeah, often, I mean, sometimes, homeowners and then other times people will try and buy prints. But, especially when it is someone who's been personally impacted, I try and do everything I can. I have a lot of times people will reach out because with press, we're able to go behind the fire lines to check on their home, see if it's okay. And if I can, I will try and do my best. But we're also working on deadlines and trying to, make photos. So I do it when it's possible. Actually, this was one of the first times I got there so quick that within like an hour of it starting, people were like trying to get rides to be able to get to their house to get their animals. I didn't feel like it was a responsible thing to do to let them, ride with me out of, their safety and, out of the liability.
Yeah.
But it happens. And this isn't necessarily like one of the most photos, um, but it just goes to show just how windy it was. I was on the beach at Will Rogers in Los Angeles, and I had to hold onto my helmet from blowing away.
From the
That's definitely,
helmet.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah. One of the helmet, yeah, it was trying to fly away. And so about this time, I get a call from my editor saying that a new fire was breaking out in Altadena, the Eaton fire, and I had to finish up filing and then make my way over there. And I found a scene that I had never seen before. It was a 7-Eleven parking lot full of senior citizens. It was a senior home that was under evacuation from the fire. Embers were, swirling around, and it was a
Mm.
mad dash to get everybody to shelter. They were loading up people into buses, into ambulances. There were construction workers who had their vans and were hoisting people into the back of their vans, any way to get everybody out. There was a lot of, tender moments there as well. The
Yeah.
staff trying to bend down and to help, reassure the patients. Some of them, in hospice. Some of them, one of them she was 102 years old. And I think this image really, has stuck with me from the fires.
Harrowing, yeah.
Emotion on her face and just
Can't
the
imagine where they are, right? I mean, people who are suffering with mental issues, I mean, that's got to be beyond comprehension. My God.
yeah, no, the chaos was surreal.
Mm.
So,
And
trying.
Any similarities with, your time in Ukraine and this type of a situation? I asked last night as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is, trying to make an image, that's, make a defining moment out of chaos. Oftentimes, you're facing with, a million moving parts, especially in disaster zone. So being able to do it respectfully, with care, while also conveying what is happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, as they're fleeing. The next day I ran into the people who had been evacuated, the senior citizens, and they had to be evacuated again from another building because now this place was under new evacuation orders as the fire was spreading. Um, I arrived back to the Eaton fire on the second day. It was this is taken at like 9 in the morning, and the skies were so dark that it felt like midnight.
And Ethan, like, what are the deadlines to get images back, back online, to the AP? Is that like every hour you have to do it? What are the requirements there?
Yeah, so we're trying to get out, images as quickly as possible. And so we have different methods. I'll send straight from camera usually. So that's just, FTP from the back of, I shoot on R5s. So from the back of the camera straight to the desk. If possible, other times, if I have a little bit more leeway, I like to be able to do it on my laptop. But I try and get first, a few set of images out, about 6 to 8 images within the hour, within 30 minutes or so, and then
So
I get a bit more time.
from you sending it to
Mhm.
them on their feed, is it 2 minutes, a minute?
It depends. If on like a big breaking news story, I'll have a live editor assigned to myself.
Hmm.
And so they are going to be expecting images for myself or maybe a couple other photographers as they get dropped in. It's called expedite. And so it just shows up on their end through Photo Mechanic, where then they can caption the images and send it out to the wire. So if the workflow is in place, it could be a couple minutes. If they're like inundated, it could be, 10 minutes or so.
Um,
Yeah. But yeah, I think the devastation at Eaton was the most I'd ever seen. Just, they couldn't keep up with it. But, it's January. What is it? January 23rd. And I covered 5 fires in like the past 2 weeks. And it was just one after another after another. It's not just people that get affected. It is it's animals too.
yeah. And can you tell the difference between the firefighters and then the firefighters that were hired by families?
Like the insurance ones.
Yeah, I guess the insurance
Yeah.
ones, yeah.
Yeah, there is a mix of different like units that come in, whether it is, state, federal, county, as well as now private contractors who are like for
Right.
insurance companies. And they'll usually, they'll be in different apparatuses. Um, but yeah, now you also have inmate crews that I met yesterday at a fire, the Hughes fire, crew from Canada.
And in these cases, we don't see any police. So are the police like down below, already taking care of traffic or and crowds, or where are they?
Yeah, they'll be typically at the perimeter, doing road control, as well as like at the first beginning, they'll be doing evacuations. So they'll be on the megaphone and they'll be going door to door, knocking on the doors, making sure that everyone has left, or those who choose to leave can get out. And then afterwards, then they'll be at the perimeter at roadblocks. And usually they're pretty good about access. Some aren't, some are. So sometimes you'll have to call for another supervisor, or try and find an alternate way in. Um, but a lot of the story, it's not just flames; it's the aftermath. And so this is, someone who was trying to get back to their home to get medication.
Hmm. Yeah.
She returned, to find everything gone from her home. Now this is back at the Palisades fire. think the juxtaposition between, the ocean and then the fires, you don't expect it to happen so close to the water.
And in your, travelings here, do you come across people who do not want to leave?
I do. Yeah, there are people who want to, protect their home from the fire, and then people who also want to come back to protect their property from looters. I think the last fire, they had arrested 70 people who were not supposed to be in the fire zone. And actually, the other day, they arrested two people who dressed up as firefighters and had brought in a fire truck. So people are now getting creative.
So they, so they pose as firefighters just to get in.
Correct. Yeah. And then I got a call. This was a third fire. This was the Kenneth fire. And so, dropping water and firefighters, fighting the backfire.
And how many hours, do you put in on a day like that?
Anywhere from, 8 to 16 hours typically. Short day, this is nothing much was happening. So just, trying to make a photo out of nothing. Um, I know, like, for example, Noah Berger, one of my mentors, I think the longest he ever did was 36 hours. Yeah. And so, I stumbled upon inmates. I had been tasked to find inmates, firefighters, who they get paid, it's like $10 a day for their work, but they're, incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Their records can get expunged, and so, it is controversial, the little pay, but it is, a good opportunity for them as well. And I couldn't find any for a long time on this day. And I was driving home and I just stumbled upon them as they were literally on the side of the, side of was it the PCH by Santa Monica, just clearing brush. And then last few images, this is from yesterday at the Hughes fire.
And will you stay with a team like that for an afternoon or a couple of hours, um, just to
It
see what they're
varies.
doing?
If I have to hike in for a while, I could be with them for a couple hours. Someone like the inmates back there, I spent maybe, 20 minutes or so.
And how is any idea how that's organized with the prisons, to get these folks there? I mean, those guys have to, of course, we found out yesterday, I think from David or Mark, that they're trained before they go. Uh,
Correct. They have their own camps that will stay at, and they're part of a crew. And I'm not super familiar with how the whole process works, but they are like low risk inmates, and then it's all volunteer based.
Yeah, yeah, Amy G has a good question. How often are you able to get names? And is that sort of required, as it relates to families or, whomever you're speaking with? Um, does the AP say, try to get that, or is it more about the photos?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. It is something that our editors want, and it's just a good journalistic practice, and even just on the human level, talking to the people that you're photographing. So trying to get names is always very important. Sometimes it is just a matter of it's just moving too fast, and it's not possible. Especially when a firefighter's in the midst of trying to save a house, but
Yeah.
if we can. Yeah.
Yeah, we got the grid again.
Yeah. Though, well, yeah, I just
That was
finished.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
with all the photos from the
Wow.
gallery. Yeah.
So in a situation like this, they're expecting you to be on call, even though, it's not a full-time gig, it's a freelance gig, but they're expecting you in this kind of situation to be around for the next 2 weeks or so. So at any moment you can jump, get out of sociology class and run, right?
Sure. Yeah. I sort of take the lead on monitoring the fire weather and the patterns. So when there is, when it looks like there's going to be a potential for a fire, I'm sort of, on call and waiting. They went, this past summer, since, I'm still in school, I sort of, only have limited time for when I can do like other projects, other travels. And so I was away over the summer for about a month, and like three fires happened, and AP wasn't happy that I was gone.
Yeah, that's it's part of your, well, that's a great situation to be. They rely on you, right? I mean that, and you clearly deliver. These images are striking, really, really, beautifully tragic, as Stefan Falker wrote in the chat room. You should, as you hand over to Sean, you should go through the chat room. There's a lot of beautiful comments
Oh,
about your work. So are you able to stick around?
I'm happy to stick around. Yeah, if there's
Right.
anyone
So
with other questions.
we'll let Sean go, and then um we'll have questions, and everyone will feed in. So with that, thank you very much, Ethan. And
Thank
we
you,
now
Frank.
have Sean Scheidt who will be presenting. Thank you, Sean.
Hey, thanks, Frank. Let me get myself situated here. Ethan, your work is absolutely incredible. Thank you for sharing.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, really astounding work, especially, and not to harp on an age thing, but especially for your age. I am not in college, unfortunately. Um, so yeah, so I have the distinction, I think, of being sort of a non-photojournalist in this crowd. My work primarily is editorial, portrait, fashion, um, things like that. I have a few documentary series um, on my grandparents and dipping my toes into things in Baltimore, where I'm from, which is sort of where I got my start documenting things. Um, when in 2015 unrest broke out in Baltimore, I it was seeing media narratives and false information on TV and in papers, and I sort of felt compelled to go tell that story about what was happening in my community, in my city. And that was sort of the first time as a photographer I went into a space um, to purely document and not um, construct a world or to do some sort of commercial assignment or photograph some celebrity or something or a fashion story. So
But Sean, I mean,
yeah,
that's a pretty intense moment, right? Like what, I mean, can you remember like this is I have to do this? It's so but it's so different from, being in a studio, right? And setting up lights and this and that. Now I'm gonna go into the crowd. I mean,
yeah, so it was not dissimilar to what happened with the fires in that I'm in West Hollywood close enough to where when the Sunset Fire broke out, we had to evacuate. And so we're living sort of in this frantic, vigilant state, where you can walk outdoors and less than a mile up the road is Runyon Canyon on fire. And so we're getting out and I'm running back and forth and I you sort of feel this sense of like I want to do something. I want to help. The Palisades is burning. Altadena is burning. This is a city I've grown to love over the course of 10 years working here, 3.5 years living here, and you feel sort of helpless. So after we evacuated and got to where we were going, I put a call out to a few editors I work with at the Washington Post and some other places saying, listen, if you need anything, I'm here. I can be available. I can be on the ground. And that night, they said, tomorrow, can you head to Altadena? We want you to photograph a few places of cultural places of note.
yeah.
So I get the assignment to go photograph the Bunny Museum, which is sort of this eclectic sort of collection of bunny related paraphernalia, right? And so I had to go photograph that and figure out how to get past the lines and if my press pass was going to be enough. And so yeah, so this is sort of where I start that journey, which is in Altadena.
And what do you think that is internally for them? We have this guy, Sean, who's there, and they look at your website and they say, wait, so, why are we sending this guy? Right? I mean, like, what makes them convinced that you can go and do that?
I
What are
think
they and what are they expecting from you?
yeah, so we get very strict parameters for our assignment. So they say, okay, go photograph the Bunny Museum. We need verticals, horizontals. We're sort of thinking this for layout. I have the luxury of not having such a tight deadline to send in images. So I don't need to check in every hour or whatever and send images off the back of my camera. They can breathe with me a bit and I can sort of craft a narrative afterwards or sort of put them together in essay form afterwards and think about them. So for these Bunny Museum images I had, oddly, none of them are in this slideshow. But I had a day and a half to get those out and live with them. So I think there's a storytelling component that we do for commercial work and for editorial work that I think is the through line here. Um, and my documentary series on my caretaking for my grandparents and the uprisings in Baltimore, I think, were sort of serve as proof that I can sort of craft these these stories
Yeah.
for them in a useful way. But while there, I'm interested in my own things. I've never seen devastation on this scale in person. And what interests me as an artist and a photographer are human moments. These aren't, there are big vistas of devastation, and we see the harrowing images of fire. And I'm not trained for that, certainly. And I have a lot of respect for people who do that work. But for me, these small moments of, this is somebody's porch, right? Where life takes place. Where, maybe who was sitting in these chairs, right? Talking, having a discussion. Anything, any number of things happen. We are intimately connected to the spaces that we inhabit. And for me as an artist and a photographer, that's very interesting for me. Especially if you can connect that to actual people. So here's a family that I came across. And Altadena was a level of danger that I don't know that people realize. Gas lines were not turned off. There were crawl spaces that were infernos, pipes sticking out, buildings exploding, and people going through rubble. The police line at that point, the National Guard had not been out, but I had been told that they had fake press passes, were trying to get in. So it took me about 2 checkpoints for them to even accept my Washington Post press pass. So I spent the better part of maybe 7 hours going through Altadena, photographing and trying to get to the Bunny Museum and satisfy the assignment, but then also be aware of what's going on around me and photographing what I feel compelled to. So I spent some time with this family, and I felt their efforts at sort of trying to find things of value and sentimental items was really touching for me. I mean, you can see in their car was like, relatively untouched, but then there's a melted bumper on it.
Yeah.
So like those moments to me are fascinating, right? Like, what do we choose to save? I have an essay that I'm working on about that, but and they were great. They were really gracious. You try to approach these situations. There they are dealing with the most traumatic day of their life, probably losing everything they've ever worked for. And I'm there taking photos, right? I'm used to very controlled situations where the subject is in on the scenario, right? And we're crafting something together. Here I am inserting myself, and that's a very you've got to handle that very gingerly, I think. And they were kind enough to approach me and talk and said I could take whatever photos I wanted. And so I spent some time with them. But anyway, more from Altadena. And I talk a lot, so jump in at any point.
Yeah. So, what was your press pass from the Washington Post not enough?
No, it got me in. So they have 2 types of press pass. They have a certain press pass that they give to their staff photographers, and then they have assignment press passes, which just is a PDF letter from the editor, basically. And that was enough to get me access all, for about a week, even through National Guard lines, which was nice. And actually, a few of the citizens who were there going through stuff asked to see my ID and compare, because they were just worried about, looters or being robbed, which is heartbreaking. This image here really stuck out at me. The color, the melted jungle gym, it shows you the type of life that was going on before,
Yeah. One other question Amy had with the passes. Did they ask for an LAPD or a sheriff press pass at any point?
No, neither. Well, actually, the National Guard did in the Palisades, but then I just said, "This is what I have," and they said, "Okay." So they let me through. So
Sorry, Amy, that's all we got.
yeah, I think also moments like this spoke to me too, because
It's melted rubber.
first fire I've ever documented, and just the heat levels to do this kind of damage to a car stood out to me. But
One thing we noticed yesterday with people going back to their homes, you could actually walk through and realize this is where the bedroom was. It had collapsed, but this is where that was, and you could sort of weed through it and then maybe find something that was in there.
I saw a lot of that happening. It was really unsafe. I think they clamped down on that, because I went back to Altadena and there was almost nobody around it after this first day. But this again is another point where the color sort of draws you in, right? And you're met with what should be an idyllic, crafted garden that somebody has, made their life around, but all that's left is the donkey and the cart, and nothing remains of the home. I found that it was emotionally afterwards. I took a beat, and it was a hard week to be hyper vigilant, and then having to do this after getting back to my house. After unpacking, after getting the cats and everyone to safety. So
Yeah, it must be interesting to go and shoot this with the sensibility that you have about people's moments and people's treasures and people's places, because everything you see is about a memory.
yeah, and I try to be respectful of that, because I feel like it's almost like going to a cemetery in some respects, and like not wanting to step on a gravestone.
Yeah,
I felt
good point.
I didn't want to just trample through the remains of people's homes, right? So what I was on the lookout for was, again, the signs of domestic life, of what was. I met this gentleman whose name I cannot right now remember, but it's written down. It's in the metadata of this file. But he lost his home. He had just bought this truck. He had been living there for 25 years. Was on the verge of retiring, and we chatted for a bit. He asked for my ID to make sure I was actually a legit press person, and he was gracious enough to tell his story to me and allow me to photograph him. And I just thought his shirt spoke volumes, because I can't imagine what he's going through, of course. But he did speak about, I chose to wear this shirt here today. I chose, to make a statement that way to the devastation. And I thought that was incredibly powerful.
Mhm.
And of course, the hard thing for me is, like, you're balancing wanting to make a good photograph with also, again, the devastation and safety that's around you, being that situational awareness, of course, because at least in Altadena, things were popping off and exploding. You have to be really careful about where you park, that kind of thing. This was, I do remember this gentleman's name is Nick. He was the last house standing on his block, within actually a 3-block radius, the only house that remained. And I met him as he was going through his house, salvaging stuff, trying to get things out of there in case it caught, or a house exploded or something. And he was incredibly gracious to speak with me and allow me to photograph him. He broke down right after this photograph. You can see it in his eyes, and he just kept saying, "Why me? Why me?" And I sat in my car for a bit afterwards, just like, how, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of survivor guilt.
Survivor's guilt,
Yeah.
right? Survivor's guilt.
So I was able to take a few photographs of him, and hear his story, because I think that's the other thing is, I want to be able to spend some time hearing their story too, and not just shoving a camera in their face. For me, that's important, right? But again, I have a little bit of that luxury. I'm not having to get quick photos out to the press or anything. So to balance that all out emotionally, I immediately wanted to see LA's response, right? And this was not an assignment necessarily, but I offered it post in other publications, and I said, I just spent a day in Altadena seeing devastation that a non-photojournalist like myself has never really seen firsthand. I've been in scary things with tear gas and situations and protests and things like that, but not quite that. And so I really wanted to document some of the relief efforts going on in LA. And I was moved to tears this first day out. Just the sheer amount of people giving, donating, offering their time. The scale was just as incredible as the damage was the scale of people helping.
So here, people are actually bringing stuff, or at this point, people are looking for things for themselves.
These are all volunteers sorting
Sorting.
stuff that has been dropped off via trucks.
Okay.
It was an incredible operation. This was at the Dream Center in LA. Um, let's see here.
It restores your faith in mankind, right?
Sure does. I mean, I went with a friend, Jose, and he was doing some video work too while this was going on. And we both, I think, were talking about how moved we were, trucks would come in, drop off stuff, other volunteers would sort, and then there's a long line of cars all through Silver Lake of people picking up goods, uh, displaced folks getting what they need.
Yeah, I mean, those last few images are very reminiscent of the images we've seen over the past almost 3 years of what's going on in Ukraine. A lot of, organized volunteering and donations and yeah, it's a beautiful thing.
And the amount of young folks, there were kids, there were old folks, I mean, everyone you can imagine was coming out. So I think that was also important for me. Again, harkening back to my experience in Baltimore after the Freddie Gray situation, seeing a lot of false information out just on the internet and in the world. I wanted to make sure we got this side of the story as well. That it wasn't just devastation. LA was coming together as a community to help people out. And there was a real sense of urgency. I mean, you can see it in this guy's face.
Both of them.
And in some respects, it also it makes you feel useful. And I think the camera is such a powerful tool that I want to be able to, as an artist and photographer, leverage that to help tell the story, right? One of the greatest privileges I think you have is being part of that record. I've shot somewhere near 12,000 photos in Baltimore during a week period of the Freddie Gray uprisings, and all of those photos now exist in a library at the Historic Society of Baltimore in Maryland, and they've been used in countless publications. Researchers have access to that, and I think that record is important too.
And these volunteer centers, are they organized by the police, or it just becomes organized instantaneously by the people?
So there was a lot of things going on. So we went to a few that were art galleries organizing it. So they had shows that were previously planned, and then this happens. So they want to be useful. The Dream Center, I think they have a whole relief center, like disaster relief operation nationally, right? So they were well set for that. And then other places, small churches were doing things. So yeah, and then other people were just busy directing people, right? So there was a big movement to provide lists and Excel spreadsheets of places you could send your stuff. So then I get a call to go to the Palisades. I can't remember what they wanted me to photograph. I think actually I didn't get a call. I went on my own, and I just used the press pass from Altadena to get in because I wanted to a couple things. I wanted to check in on a friend's family's home, and I wanted just to sort of balance the story by telling that side of it. So this is the start of that. And it was incredible to me what survived and what didn't. So again, here keeping with that reminder of domestic life, of what this house stood for somebody.
It's interesting, like, you're showing that and these little nuanced spots. You could see what's coming for so many different photographers taking on the next project of this, of just the lawn ornaments or the rubber melting. You could just see what's coming.
And then I thought, there was a lot of hoses out for people who were probably, of course, trying to save their property. I found those little tableaus very fascinating. Backyard views, yeah. So
it's interesting, Sean, hearing you talk and seeing the images, how important it is to be able to be a storyteller when you're showing work like this, because it gives it context other than a poignant shot. But your words are very comforting, I have to say.
Oh, thank you, Frank. I appreciate that. One thing I don't want to add to ever with this kind of stuff, and I want to be careful with, is disaster porn, right?
Yeah,
Relish that a little bit. And not that any photojournalist would do that, but I think there's a tendency, sometimes to just, because the sheer scale of destruction is unbelievable, to just sort of look at those. But often, I think for me, the small moments, like I came across this car, and at first I noticed the back had been smashed out, and so I thought, oh, looted, probably, or somebody was trying to get something from it. But then I started noticing like just the heat melting a handle for the car, right? Like, and the sides. I mean, it's just incredible to me, right? So those little moments are important context, I think.
Could you tell if that happened right there or the car was somewhere else and then they came back? Well, you can't
It,
tell.
it's hard to tell. I mean, it didn't seem like it was moved. The side had scorching on it, so I suspect, and the house directly over across from it was gone. So my thought is that that house must have been on fire, and this must have just been radiated heat from it.
Yeah.
The other interesting to me, particularly in the Palisades, that I did not notice in Altadena, was the amount of workers trimming back hedges, making sure gas lines were turned off. So I was trying to, you see a truck up the street, right? They're lifting up branches and cutting down trees. The amount of workers that were there. In fact, it was funny. After I took this photo, I was walking down the street to try to get to my car, and one of the workers called me over because he was an amateur photographer and wanted to talk shop, which I just found so surreal under these circumstances, you know?
Yeah.
But the goal of being in this neighborhood for me, in addition to adding and fleshing out the story, was to locate my friend's family's home. It was in their family for 60 years until he passed away in 2015 and they sold the house. And this is that home. And they're on the East Coast. They have no access to finding out if it was still standing or not. And so I came and took a few photos for them and went through the space. And again, in keeping with what I'm interested in showing, again, is this swing set, in front of the house. And the family emailed me or reached out to me and texted me and thanked me, and sort of a sweet moment that I could give them at least. But their grandfather was a teacher, and I guess before there's a section of the Palisades that's more sort of a normal neighborhood and not just celebrity homes. And they sent me all these old photos of them playing in this front yard, and that's where the visuals really hit home for you, is when you connect it to that, I think.
Yeah.
And then, these are just moments, right? Like you're selling your home. Like, what do you do? Like, this is still the Palisades, is up in the hills. So you won't find a lot, among what I've documented are not a lot of these big sites, but I was struck by this view because it reminds me of a lot of photos of neighborhoods where you might see kids riding down the street with bikes, or, you have the washer and dryer there. And the amount of chimneys was also, the chimneys survived. So many chimneys, especially in Altadena. And then my last assignment I got more recently was to photograph some cultural sites and some restaurants. The Real Inn was particularly important to my girlfriend and I. When we moved out here, we spent a lot of time there. We take all of our guests there. It was a third place for us to go for a hike in the canyons, and then go eat dinner or lunch at the Real Inn. So we were really sad to hear about the loss of that for that family. But then this little bit was uncovered. This was not visible as far as I could tell when the structure was still standing, but right where you would stand in line, there was like this for your food to go in. There's like sort of like this ramp, and this would have been covered by that ramp. And there's these names. I've reached out to the family, and I'm still waiting to hear back who they are. Right. But it's an interesting record of whoever poured this concrete and who these names were. So stay tuned on that. Maybe they were
that's
a set of employees or something. I don't know.
Yeah, just don't know. But it's part of that history, right?
Yeah, and I think there's open questions whether they can rebuild there or not, but we're hoping for the best.
Yeah, I wonder what becomes the overriding factor, whether you can build or you can't build again. And we were discussing this last night as well. What does that look like? Does it become cookie cutter houses, or and that character is just gone, or what, what could it be?
When there's some concern with the real inn, at least, it's on state park property. It's right behind us, Topanga Canyon, and that's part of the state park, I think. And so they were saying that there's some open question, at least for them, if they can even build um, on that. And next to it, of course, is the Topanga Ranch Motel, which is nothing's left of that historic place. So it's tough to see those places that I personally have a connection to, again, this one's important too, is it for me, because it's like this white fence, the white picket fence narrative, a little on the nose, I guess, but it is, people set up their hopes and dreams in these places, their hopes for the future, for what their kids are going to do. There are walls where people measure heights. There's all sorts of things going on here. Every place has a story. I worked for a few years documenting with a community artist friend of mine spaces in Baltimore that used to be important to the Lumbee Indian community. And one of our focuses on were sort of traces in the physical environment left, years later. And it'll be curious to see what gets left, what traces of this tragedy get left, and what story that tells. So for me, I'm going to keep returning to these places to photograph and clean up. And this is the Topanga Ranch Motel, was.
And that's an interesting point. What is that motivation to want to go back?
That's something I think a lot about, right? I think part of it is that storytelling nature that we all have as photographers, right? But I also think, I don't want things to get forgotten. You don't want. We move so quickly in the media cycle,
Yeah.
and we're so acculturated or so used to seeing awful things these days that it becomes noise. So if you can focus that, the dramaticness of it, the devastation, the largeness of it, that's almost incomprehensible. And so you just glaze over it. It becomes like VFX in a movie, right? But if you can zoom in a bit to tell more personal stories in those moments, it focuses you, I think, and it doesn't become noise anymore. And so part of that is like staying with it afterwards, because the story doesn't end for them.
Is it for you, or for anyone in that matter, is it intriguing, or is it a responsibility to do that?
I think it's a response. I feel it personally, and this is just for me as a resident of LA, a place where I chose to invest my life. This is now my city. I feel it's a responsibility. I felt that way with Baltimore. I was born and raised, and it was my responsibility to use what tools I have to tell a story, to get that out there. I felt the same pull and drive here now that I've been in LA for these years, and so I do think there's a bit of a responsibility. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that every influencer or guy with a camera needs to go out and be unsafe, right? I think having a working relationship with editors that can get that story out, and you're not just collecting images for yourself or an art gallery or whatever, is important. Because otherwise it's just vanity, I think, to some degree. You don't want to just go out and collect these images without thought to where they'll eventually be. But yeah, this is just another neighborhood, and the Fresno firefighters came down, and I'm just struck here by the green grass next to this. Like, and then this is Will Rogers.
Yeah, David was this.
And yeah, so that's what I got for you guys. But the work's still going on. I'm still pitching some projects based on stories of the survivors and where they go from here. It doesn't. It's not really clickbait material, right? But that's where attention spans fall off. But I think it's almost more important.
Yeah. Yeah, and both of you guys, in the chat room, put your websites and all that information so people know how to contact you. So anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat room. You could just speak up. But you both should see. I mean, there's a lot of great comments in the chat room about the work. So everyone really appreciates that. And so, do you both wait now to get the call, or you're going to be going back in to document, these other issues that you want to cover? What do you do next, Ethan?
Well, thank you. And Sean, that was really fantastic. I think one of the things that I struggle with, is like those slow moments, and you do a really good job. I think with stories like this, the devastation is just so massive that like where do you even begin covering it? And so you did a terrific job, finding those details, finding those slow moments, and really getting, that emotion in like those still life frames. What's next for me? I'm going to be doing more work on the fires. I would like to continue following the residents of the evac of the senior center. I'm working on a documentary, so I'm going to be filming next week. And I just got an email today. I'm going down to Juarez to cover the border on Tuesday.
Okay. Wow. Often going. So it's one of those things you want to be doing this, and then you get the call, you got to go down there, and that
Yeah.
goes on the back burner a little bit, right? And so what do you do to make sure that it doesn't go too far away on the back burner? Because you're going to go from one project to a next, right? Like, how do you do that? How do you navigate that?
I mean, the Palisades fire is, it's only 10 minutes from it's 10 minutes from my place. And so
Mm.
I can, I'm just keep returning, keep showing up, So that, I mean, the news media, like for example, like I was already talking to my editors, and the metrics after like day 4 nosedived, which is, shocking considering the scale of damage, $250 billion and, economic loss.
In their readership,
Yeah, in the
online.
readership. Yep. In the readership, after 4 days, it just tanked. And so, trying to, work on it on my own time is, what's gonna have to be done.
Yeah, and for me, it's conversations with editors. So I've pitched sort of two very focused stories that I'm hoping they'll get behind and
Right.
partner with me to tell. But if not, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But I will still pursue it on my own. Um, there's certain logistical advantages between having a publication support the work that you're doing. So I'm
Right.
really looking to tell those stories about as people start to move back into their homes,
Mm.
particularly around what they
Yeah.
chose to save. What was important, because I had that moment when evacuating. You have to decide what is important. What do I take in this car with
Mm.
me? Uh,
Right.
that interests me, and I want to tell that story.
What did you take?
3 cats, a lot of sentimental stuff, and a box full of some legal papers, and about 12 hard drives.
Yeah. It's yeah, that's compelling stuff, right? I mean, you just wonder what you would grab. I'm thinking myself, I guess, yeah. Yeah, we'd
Well,
have
and we also stayed packed because you didn't know. Like,
Right.
we kept everything staged. Now I had to get everything out of the car to go shoot stuff, right?
Yeah.
But then we were still under red flag, and anything can pop up, and the winds were so intense. So you don't know. So you're sort of living for a week, not knowing, and hoping that you're safe where you are. But
Yeah, I mean, the similarities to conflict zones where people are thinking, should we leave because the Russians are coming, right? Will we be like these folks are going to be refugees now, right? In LA, they're in their own way refugees, right? Running to some shelter. Mm. It's
yeah,
interesting. Yeah, Stefan had an interesting point about the rebuild is going to be difficult because in the ground, there's all these materials that have melted in there, right? I mean, that have to be cleared out.
when the air quality's not been great here, honestly, and I have asthma, so I'm particularly sensitive to it. So
Mm,
I'm masking outside. I mean, I was coughing for a couple days straight after doing these assignments, and I had coverings and everything, and so it is. I think they're saying that AQI, the air quality indicator, doesn't take into effect or doesn't take into account like chlorine and asbestos and
um,
other particulates like that. So you really want to be. It's like 9/11 type levels of
just
stuff,
gonna say,
like
yeah,
depending on
yeah,
what wind is blowing.
yeah. And how long will it take to affect the firefighters, right? Who are in there, right? I mean, that's going to be a real thing coming in the next few years. If anyone has any questions, like I say, everyone's unmuted. You can jump in. Yeah, this is really compelling. I mean, when does, with the metrics, that issue, when do they completely stop? Your publications.
I mean, for AP, I think like at one point we had, I don't know, 8 or 12 photographers out at one time, covering these 4 fires, 5 fires. They scaled back significantly. The last few days, with the increase in the red flag conditions, we were staging. So there's a couple of us, but they've pared it back. So I don't think they're really doing much daily coverage anymore,
Right.
which is quite unfortunate. They're monitoring for new fires, but yeah. I think, I think there are a couple long-term projects in the works, but that's about it.
I
Right.
think the post only had 3 on the ground, I was told, when I was out, including myself when I was out and going around. I did have one checkpoint in the Palisades turn me away, but then I managed to get in at the next one.
But I think the access is, to your point about people like checking your ID, is I've never experienced it like that on this, except for this fire. The National Guard and the police, matching my press credential with my driver's license.
Yeah.
Or even I even had a firefighter ask for my credential, which never happened before. So I think people are becoming increasingly suspicious, especially with all of the, influencers who are coming or want to, people who are wanting to build their portfolio.
I think we mentioned yesterday the drone collision.
Oh
So
my
it's
gosh. Yeah.
it's another reason why you don't just want to sort of go out on your own and just do your own project. I think I see myself a little bit as a photographer as an extension of those people who's experiencing it, right? So it's they can't tell that story; they're experiencing it. I can only serve to highlight that for them. Uh,
Mm.
so I try to approach it that way, you know.
And what are the influences? What are they getting out of this? Just that they're there?
Views. It's just all clicks and views. They want to get people on TikTok seeing what they're doing. They want to get eyes, and they make money. And
Right.
it's for me that's gross. I think I just
So it's them walking through the neighborhood. Look where I am.
Yeah.
quite
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah, It's
Yeah, it happens to me now that I'm thinking because I went biking along the PCH and I saw the mobile home park and I was able to get in. There was no control and taking some picture. And at some point, a guy that I asked just by chance. What was this supposed to be? Because I didn't even know that was a mobile park. And he told me, well, I think this should be a restaurant. Okay. And then it was like, oh, sorry, can you take a picture of me? And I'm like, where? Like there. I was like, really? So he stepped on the ground and taking a kind of selfie picture. And I was like, why are you so creepy to take a selfie in this environment? Oh no, it's not what you think. And I was like, so
tell me what I think.
yeah, I
Yeah.
took picture aside in reality. So and then okay, that's yours. Probably then he saw that it doesn't have any picture. But I was like, what are you doing?
There was an incident after the Haiti earthquake where a fashion photographer went in and did a fashion shoot in the rubble.
Mhm.
And believe it or not, I had somebody DM me suggesting I do the same. I
Really?
was just like they thought, oh, it would raise awareness. Will it? You know,
Well, that's like Annie Leibovitz did that, with the Ukrainian president early on, in Ukraine. And there was a lot of that kind of conversation back and forth on, what is the value of doing that.
especially with that level of production.
Yeah, right. With yeah, she probably got the plane there. Yeah, it's yeah, real compelling issues, right? What people will do these days, it's changed so much. I mean, even like the way you guys speak about, looting, like, and David mentioned that last night as well. That people would be looting in this situation is just impossible to really imagine that.
Well, they
Um,
said I was told by the police in Altadena that they had people in cars putting up press signs in the back of their car, fake press passes they just print out to get through, which is why part of the reason why they were heavily checking IDs at a certain point, uh,
hmm.
and or calling editors, I guess. But like, yeah, that was a real problem, I was told. So
Yeah, I mean, I think yes, there was a lot of looting, but I think disasters bring out the best and the worst in people, and I've seen that everywhere. And to
Yeah.
your point with your photos at the volunteer site, there was a huge coming together of Los Angeles, and I think all over through donations and donations as well. Yeah.
It was really moving to see that, and to be able to document that after spending a day in that, just amongst destruction.
Yeah. Do you think there'll be a lot of coverage of the rebuilding? Another question from Amy. Or you think that becomes a little bit boring and until it's all done, but they'll care about it? I guess it'll be sort of a work in progress, right?
I mean, it's important to cover. I mean, I'm sadly cynical. There'll be another natural disaster that comes and pulls people's attention away. Like think about the hurricanes that happened in or was it a tornado? The hurricanes in North Carolina, right? That was just like a month or two ago, and people have already forgotten about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my father's down there with a volunteer group helping rebuild, but you don't see it in the media. So I think that serves as a good guide for, I mean, LA is a bit of a hotspot, so there might be, because of the celebrity attention, and there might be a bit more focus, but I do think people lose interest after a while.
Yeah,
It's funny, celebrities, because I haven't seen any celebrities on TV that they've lost their homes. And I don't know if that's what I've seen, or I've missed it, but
There's been a bunch.
There's
there has
a
been, yeah.
oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that at all.
Mel Gibson's was almost borderline funny. The interview
Yeah.
he gave, took video
Yeah.
of his house and presented it. It was
John Goodman.
Yeah.
unreal.
Also, somebody did a list. I think the Hollywood Reporter did a list of celebrities who lost their home.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think natural disasters are, a big equalizer. They're, affecting both the rich and the poor. I mean, it's
James
true.
Woods
The
was
rich
one.
can get, private firefighters, and that's a whole nother debate. But I saw, both the
That was
rich
the other interesting part of the story too, is that like Altadena has a much different history than the Palisades, and it's rooted in black working class, middle class, like neighborhood, generational families passing homes down. Whereas the Palisades, it's the Palisades. It's largely it has the section has a working class history from what I understand, but it's known for being this sort of refuge of celebrities and big mansions and such. So I thought that the juxtaposition of the two areas of destruction, the attention that the Palisades was getting versus Altadena, was why it was even more important to show sort of a balanced approach to that. But,
yeah, it was interesting because I was kind of thinking about this the last couple of days in terms of the coverage, like as I was looking at different people's pictures, because the Palisades got evacuated largely before all the fire kind of came in. Just the coverage, what we saw of the dynamic was really different. Like Ethan's pictures, because you were there, you were in Altadena, what, on Tuesday, late Tuesday, or sorry, or early Wednesday?
started.
Sorry?
That's about like an hour after it started, like 8 p.m., I think.
Okay, right, 8 p.m. So Tuesday night, so the first night of the fires. So you had those people, it was really dynamic as they were getting evacuated. Whereas I think the Palisades, it was really a lot of those people had already left, kind of like by the time the thing was really going full force. So we didn't have those scenes of people kind of like in the neighborhoods as much while it was happening, like in Altadena.
I mean, at the beginning of the Palisades, you had those roads, was it Sunset, completely covered with cars, and they had to get bulldozered out of the way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And if I'm
having to explain that to folks back home checking in on you, where they're like, get out, get out. It was like, no, I'm going to wait for evacuation orders. You don't want to clog the roads. Like, people don't think these are things that I think people don't think about. They're like, no, just leave. It's like, well, if we all leave at once. When my area of West Hollywood and sort of Hollywood Hills were evacuated, we managed to sort of pack up in like 40 minutes and get out. But right after we left, there was massive gridlock. I mean, there were people who were circling for hours and couldn't get out. And it's like, that's why you don't go all at once. You have to balance that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Amy, I think you're right. Palisades began, the Altadena was after dark. I remember waking up Wednesday morning to sort of a very dramatic scene outside. It was sort of apocalyptic looking.
Yeah, you just wonder. Someone just put in stuff. I'm putting that Maui got forgotten pretty quickly.
Right.
Yeah, when it's not under your own nose,
They're gonna remember with the cleanup though very soon. how bad that was.
Right. Yeah, and then unfortunately nowadays everything will become a political issue. Who's going to pay for it? How they're going to pay for it? All of that. Right. That's coming right down the pike.
David,
Um,
I think you spoke yesterday about just how much cleanup was immediately there along PCH, especially like a
Yeah.
lot of people trimming trees back and clearing things out of the way. I was amazed myself about just how quickly crews were in there cleaning up.
It's true. Yeah, that is a good sign. And just I was just thinking because we've been talking about a little bit sort of the long term, how this is going to be covered. And I think that, I mean, having lived in LA in 1992 and 94, the riots and then the earthquake 2 years later, I've sort of been around to see the reconstruction, and there's so many. It's not like it's just one story of rebuilding or reconstruction. There's like 100 different issues. Somebody put in the chat room, they were talking about the soil and all the chemicals
right.
and the potential hazardous stuff that's in there. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be many different kind of micro stories that probably are not going to be covered that much in the national media. I mean, I'm sure the New York Times will do it because they have a ton of readers in California and Los Angeles. So it's almost like they treat it like as a hometown newspaper in a way,
Yeah.
and of course the LA Times will do some also, but the size of the staff is not near like it was back in the 1990s. So, I think that, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting things that will come out of very small media organizations, local things or ProPublica, things like that, that may not have a huge reach. So people who are really interested are going to have to kind of, look hard to see what's happening if they're not here to see it for themselves.
And it on some level what we were saying before with Sean, like it'll be these sort of human interest stories that a photographer will have to initiate themselves to get into publications. Wow, someone covered lawn ornaments that survived, or whatever it may be. And it really comes from folks like you guys to say this is interesting, I'm going to cover it. I don't know if I'll ever get picked up doing it, but it's important to me.
That's part of why I'm sort of glad I come at this sort of adjacent through other editorial work, because I can be shooting something for the Oscars or whatever, like, and doing portraits and whatever, and I can do my own things on the side and explore. And I don't have that. I don't experience that. Hey, I get a call and I have to be across the country tomorrow.
Right.
That's the next tragedy or something. So
Like
there's a bit
Ethan.
more space to work, which I appreciate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's on some level it almost becomes, dare I say, your responsibility. Folks like yourselves, who care to do it, so you enlighten the rest of us. Responsibility is probably the wrong word, but you get what I mean.
I think it is I think you're right. It is a responsibility. Yeah. That's
In some way. Well, I can't thank you guys enough, and as I said last night with David and Mark, the platform is always there for you. So when you do your personal stories, we want to see it. We want to know about it. So, we have you guys we have you guys back. And like I say, you really should take a look into the chat room there. That a lot of really nice comments about about all your work. And so Ethan, being that I would think the youngest person here, we're going to let you go first as you sign off, as we sign off tonight, because your work is great. You clearly have, I mean, I'm not the editor of the Post, but you got an incredible future ahead of you. I think we all recognize that. So any words of wisdom for us?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening. And yeah, all the kind words are much appreciated. I don't know. I think as we were all sort of talking about the big images are easy to make, and so to speak, and all the elements come together. You have the fire, you have the firefighter, you have the peak moment, but sticking with the story is what is going to be the most impactful long term. And I don't know, any piece of advice would be, I don't know, find a story that you care about. I don't think, anyone normally would hire a 22-year-old, or at the time, a 17-year-old to cover a fire, but it was sort of it's been a beat that has been of interest to me, growing up with, the thoughts of climate change and the impact of what it's going to be like in the future. I think that was a story that compelled me to be told. And so I've just been doing it. And so find whatever that is.
Great. Sean?
Yeah, well, thanks again, Frank, for including me in this, and Ethan and David, your work yesterday. Like, it's an honor to be included with so many talented photographers who are legit risking their lives in a way that I have not been doing for this and not trained to do. So, thank you guys for that. And I think it's important to remember that whether you're a sort of 17-year-old photographer being dragged in or a fashion guy being dragged in to do an assignment, we all have a lens that we can approach this through, right? And that's important to the mosaic that is the final story on this, which will not be told for decades from now. But being a part of that record is important. So get up the nerve, just like Ethan when he was 17, to like get assignments, or myself, who loves a controlled studio setting or environmental setting, to say, you know what, I'm available to get out there and do that work because I feel passionate about it. Pitch that to editors, pitch that to people, and it's all important, all of it. So that would be my advice. I don't know, just keep shooting. I've been doing this for like 15 plus years, so keep going.
And David, being that you're here and we didn't like what you finished off last night with, we're going to give you another shot.
But I finished off with last night. Okay, yeah.
I'm only kidding.
Okay, yeah. Just
you had the Batman reference.
Oh, no, that's true.
The Adam West. The
That
Adam
was
West.
yeah, Batman. Yeah.
So
Right.
really, guys, thank you so much, and thanks everyone for coming in. And we have another presentation next week on next Wednesday. So not on this particular topic, but you'll get notices about it. So hopefully you can jump in. And any of the new folks that are here, it's great that Ethan and Sean brought you here, and David and Mark. So I appreciate that. And thanks. Just be careful.